Late one foggy evening, the Sorrell-Weed House loomed in the dim light, its worn facade whispering tales of its haunted past. A group of paranormal enthusiasts gathered at the gate, their breath visible in the chilly air. They had heard of the house's dark reputation and were eager to uncover its mysteries. As the group entered, the air inside the mansion seemed heavier, filled with an eerie stillness. The tour guide began recounting the house's tragic history, the sorrow of Matilda Sorrell's untimely death and the lingering pain of those who suffered within its walls. But it wasn't just the stories that chilled the visitors. It was the feeling of being watched, as if unseen eyes tracked their every move. The guide led them to the grand staircase, where Matilda supposedly met her tragic end. As they stood in silence, a faint sobbing echoed through the halls. "Do you hear that?" whispered one of the guests. The guide nodded, his face pale. "Many have heard her cries," he said softly. "She mourns here, still." Moving deeper into the house, they arrived at the dimly lit parlor. The old chandelier swayed gently, though no breeze stirred the air. One by one, candles flickered and then went out, plunging the room into darkness. A cold draft circled around them, carrying the faint scent of jasmine, Matilda's favorite flower. Suddenly, a loud thud came from upstairs. The group, hesitant but intrigued, climbed the creaky staircase. At the top, they found themselves in the master bedroom. There, on the dusty mirror, were words etched in fog, "Leave this place." Panicked murmurs filled the room, but the guide urged calm. "This house has its ways," he said, "and it doesn't take kindly to strangers." Just as they were about to leave, a shadowy figure appeared at the window, staring out into the dark night. The figure turned slowly, revealing a face half hidden in shadow, its eyes hollow and filled with a sorrow so deep it chilled them to the bone. The group fled, stumbling down the stairs and out the front door. Outside, the fog had thickened, wrapping around the house like a shroud. They looked back, seeing the figure still at the window watching them leave. To this day, visitors to the Sorrell-Weed House report similar encounters. Some say Matilda's spirit is trapped, reliving her final moments, while others believe the house itself is a living entity, feeding off the fear of those who dare to enter. Would you return to such a place, knowing its haunted legacy? The Sorrell-Weed House waits, its secrets locked in shadow, ready for the next brave soul to uncover them. The group hurried down the street, their breath quick and hearts pounding. Yet, as they put distance between themselves and the house, a strange pull seemed to grip them. One of the guests, a young woman named Emily, slowed her pace, glancing back over her shoulder. I felt something," she whispered. "It was like someone was calling to me." The others urged her to keep walking, but Emily's feet were rooted to the spot. "I can't just leave," she insisted, her voice trembling. "It's like she needs help." Before anyone could stop her, Emily turned and started back toward the house. The fog seemed to part for her, almost welcoming her return. Reluctantly, the rest of the group followed, their fear outweighed by a gnawing curiosity. Back inside the mansion, the atmosphere was different. The heavy air seemed to pulse with a sinister energy. Emily led them back up the staircase, her movements guided by an unseen force. She stopped in front of the mirror in the master bedroom, now clear and unmarked. Without warning, Emily raised her hand and touched the glass. Her fingers moved as though tracing invisible lines. Slowly, words appeared, written in the same misty script, "Find the truth beneath." The floor beneath their feet groaned, and a chill ran through the room. The group exchanged nervous glances. "What does it mean?" one of them asked, but Emily was already moving, her gaze fixed on the ground. She knelt down, pressing her hands to the floorboards. With a sudden creak, a section of the wood gave way, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling down into the dark depths below. "No one mentioned a basement," the guide muttered, his face pale. But Emily didn't hesitate. She descended into the shadows, her steps echoing eerily in the confined space. The others followed, their fear growing with each step. The staircase ended in a small, stone-walled room. In the flickering light of a single ancient lantern, they saw an old wooden trunk in the center. It was bound in iron and locked with a rusted padlock. Around it, faint markings were etched into the floor, symbols none of them recognized. Emily reached out, her hand trembling as she touched the lock. The moment she did, the air in the room grew colder, and a low whisper filled the space, swirling around them like a spectral wind. The lock clicked open. Without hesitation, Emily lifted the lid. Inside was a collection of items: an old diary, a small porcelain doll with cracked features, and a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. She picked up the diary and opened it, her eyes scanning the yellowed pages. As she read aloud, the whispers grew louder, transforming into anguished cries. The symbols on the floor began to glow faintly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Suddenly, the door to the staircase slammed shut, trapping them in the room. "She wants us to know the truth," Emily said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "But at what cost?" Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath them began to shake, and the lantern flickered dangerously. The cries grew louder, now almost deafening, as if the walls themselves were wailing in torment. Emily's eyes widened as she reached the final page of the diary. "We've disturbed something far worse than we imagined," she whispered. "And now it's awake. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story." The lantern's light flickered wildly, casting long, distorted shadows across the stone walls. The cries that filled the room seemed to come from every direction, a cacophony of pain and anger. Emily's hands trembled as she held the diary, her eyes fixed on the final, cryptic words: "The house holds the key, but the price is your soul." Suddenly, the room fell silent, an oppressive stillness settling over them. The only sound was their own ragged breathing. Then, slowly, from the corner of the room, a faint glow began to emanate. The group turned to see the symbols on the floor pulsing softly, like a heartbeat. "We need to get out of here," one of the group whispered, but the door remained firmly shut, as though the house itself refused to let them leave. Emily knelt beside the glowing symbols, her fingers tracing their edges. They're not just symbols," she murmured. "They're part of a ritual." "A ritual for what?" someone asked, panic creeping into their voice. Emily didn't answer immediately. Instead, she flipped back through the diary, scanning the pages frantically. "It's a binding spell," she finally said. "To trap something dark." The group exchanged uneasy glances. "If it's trapped, then why does it feel like it's still here, watching us?" As if in response, the air grew colder again, and a deep, guttural growl resonated through the chamber. The lantern flickered, casting brief glimpses of a shadowy figure in the corner of the room, an indistinct, shifting form that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Emily's voice shook as she read from the diary. "The ritual wasn't completed. They tried to contain it, but they failed. And now it's feeding off us, our fear, our energy. We have to finish it," the guide said, his voice trembling. "Whatever they started, we have to finish it." "But how?" another asked, their eyes darting around the room. Emily turned the pages again, her eyes narrowing as she read the instructions written in a shaky, desperate hand. "We need to recreate the ritual. The symbols, the incantations, everything has to be exact." The ground beneath them rumbled again, as if the house itself was reacting to their discovery. The shadowy figure moved closer, its shape becoming more defined, a tall, humanoid form with eyes that burned like embers in the dark. "No time to waste," Emily said, her voice filled with a newfound determination. She began to draw the symbols on the floor with trembling hands, using the old chalk from the trunk. The others helped, their fear momentarily replaced by the urgency of their task. As they worked, the growling intensified, the shadowy figure circling them like a predator stalking its prey. The air thickened, making it harder to breathe. The lantern flickered once more, casting long, flickering shadows that seemed to dance with malevolent glee. With the symbols complete, Emily stood in the center of the circle. "Now, the incantation," she said, holding the diary tightly. She began to chant the ancient words, her voice steady despite the terror that gripped her. The room shook violently, the walls seeming to close in around them. The shadowy figure lunged forward, only to be stopped by the glowing symbols on the floor. It recoiled, a terrible scream echoing through the chamber, filled with rage and agony. Emily continued the chant, her voice rising above the chaos. The symbols glowed brighter, pulsing with an intense light. The figure thrashed against the invisible barrier, its form distorting, as if trying to break free. Suddenly, the door behind them burst open, a gust of cold wind sweeping through the room. The lantern's flame was extinguished, plunging them into darkness. But the symbols on the floor continued to glow, illuminating the shadowy figure as it writhed in pain. And then, the figure let out a final, bone-chilling scream that seemed to shake the very foundation of the house. The light from the symbols intensified, blinding them all momentarily. When their vision cleared, the shadow was gone, the room eerily silent once more. But the peace was short-lived. From deep within the walls came a low rumble, like the distant sound of a heartbeat. The glow from the symbols dimmed, flickering as if struggling to maintain their power. Emily clutched the diary tightly, flipping through the pages again. Her hands trembled as she reached the last entry. Words she hadn't noticed before appearing faintly in the margin. The seal is temporary. Beware the second awakening. The ritual isn't a permanent fix, she whispered, her voice filled with dread. It's only a matter of time before it comes back stronger. The group stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. What do we do now? One of them asked, their voice barely audible. Emily glanced around the chamber, her mind racing. We need to find the original source. There must be something, an artifact, a relic, something binding it to this place. The guide nodded slowly. There's a legend about a cursed object hidden somewhere in the house, something tied to the dark force. But no one has ever found it. A sudden, sharp knock echoed through the chamber, causing them all to jump. The sound came from above, as if something or someone was walking heavily across the floorboards above them. We have to go back up, Emily said, her voice resolute. Whatever's happening, it's not over yet. Reluctantly, they ascended the narrow staircase, emerging into the mansion's main hall. The air was colder than before, the shadows deeper. The house seemed more alive now, its walls pulsing faintly with a dark energy. As they moved through the hall, the knocking continued, leading them toward a room they hadn't explored. The door at the end of the corridor stood ajar, a faint light spilling out into the hallway. Emily pushed the door open cautiously. Inside was a small study, its walls lined with ancient books and artifacts. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, upon which rested a small, intricately carved box. The moment they entered, the room grew colder, the light from the single flickering candle casting long, sinister shadows. This must be it, Emily whispered, approaching the box. She hesitated, then reached out, her fingers brushing the cold, smooth surface. The instant she touched it, the room seemed to breathe a low, guttural sound emanating from the walls. The box was warm to the touch, as if it pulsed with its own life. Emily felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over her, but she couldn't pull her hand away. Slowly, she opened the lid. Inside, nestled in a bed of dark velvet, was a small, ancient key. Its metal was tarnished, but intricate runes glowed faintly along its surface. Emily felt an inexplicable connection to it, as if it was calling out to her. The key, she murmured. It's the source of the binding. Suddenly, the walls of the study trembled, and a deep, resonant voice filled the room, ancient and full of malice. Asterisk, you cannot escape. The house is mine, and so are you, asterisk. The group huddled together, their fear palpable. Emily held the key tightly, her mind racing. If the key binds the darkness, then maybe it can also destroy it, she said, her voice trembling with both fear and determination. But how? The guide asked, his eyes wide with terror. Before Emily could answer, the floor beneath them shuddered violently. The shadows in the room began to coalesce, forming a swirling vortex of darkness in the center of the room. From within the vortex, the same fiery eyes they had seen before appeared, glaring at them with pure hatred. The voice spoke again, louder this time, reverberating through their bones. You are too late. The house is awakening, and so am I. The vortex of darkness swirled violently, the fiery eyes piercing through the gloom, watching their every move. The house groaned, its walls seeming to close in, as though the very structure was alive, breathing and angry. Emily clutched the ancient key tightly, feeling its warmth spread through her hand, an odd contrast to the chilling air around them. The key, she whispered, her mind racing. It's not just a binding tool. It's a weapon. A weapon, one of the group asked, their voice shaking. Against what? That? They gestured toward the swirling vortex, which had begun to expand, tendrils of shadow stretching out toward them. Emily nodded, her eyes locked on the vortex. It's connected to the house, to whatever dark force is trapped here. If we can use the key to sever that connection, then maybe we can stop it, the guide finished, his face pale but determined. The shadows slithered closer, the room growing colder with each passing second. Emily took a deep breath, holding the key in both hands. She stepped toward the vortex, feeling the oppressive weight of its energy pressing against her. You can't do this alone, one of the others called out, reaching for her, but she shook her head. I have to, Emily replied, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. This is what it wants to break us apart, to feed on our fear. But together we can end this. The group hesitated for a moment before stepping forward, forming a protective circle around Emily. They clasped hands, their fear momentarily eclipsed by a shared resolve. Emily held the key out toward the vortex, its runes glowing brighter, the light cutting through the dark tendrils reaching for them. The voice from the vortex roared in anger, the ground beneath them shaking violently. You dare defy me? You are nothing but dust, and to dust you shall return. Emily gritted her teeth, focusing all her energy on the key. We are not dust, she said firmly. We are stronger than you. Stronger together. As she spoke, the runes on the key flared with blinding light. The shadows writhed and twisted, recoiling from the brilliance. The vortex seemed to shrink, its edges fraying as if it were being torn apart from within. But then, the voice shifted, becoming a low, sinister chuckle. You think you understand this power? Foolish child. You cannot destroy what you do not comprehend. The light from the key flickered, and for a moment, the vortex surged forward, tendrils of darkness wrapping around Emily's arms. She gasped, the cold seeping into her skin, but she didn't let go of the key. No, she cried out. We won't let you win. The others tightened their grip on each other, their combined strength radiating through the circle. The room filled with a strange hum, a vibration that seemed to come from the very walls of the house. The symbols from the basement, unseen until now, began to glow faintly on the floor beneath them, forming a protective barrier. Emily felt the warmth of the key spread through her entire body, the runes blazing with renewed energy. She took a step closer to the vortex, the shadows recoiling in fear. With one final surge of power, she thrust the key into the center of the swirling mass. The vortex screamed, a sound so piercing it felt like it could shatter their very souls. The room erupted in light, blinding them all. The last thing Emily heard before the world went silent was the voice, now filled with rage and desperation. This is not the end. You will see me again. And then silence. As the blinding light faded, the room fell into an eerie stillness. The oppressive cold lifted, replaced by a strange warmth that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the house. Emily collapsed to her knees, the ancient key slipping from her grasp, its runes now dark and lifeless. The others rushed to her side, helping her to her feet. Is it over? One of them asked, their voice barely above a whisper. Emily nodded weakly, her eyes fixed on the spot where the vortex had been. The darkness was gone, the malevolent presence that had haunted the Sorrell-Weed House seemingly banished. Yet, an uneasy silence hung in the air, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The guide looked around, his face pale but relieved. The house feels different, he said. Lighter. Emily picked up the key, its once glowing runes now faded. "We did it," she whispered, though her voice was tinged with uncertainty. "We severed the connection." The group made their way back through the mansion, the oppressive atmosphere replaced by a strange calm. The once ominous shadows now seemed to retreat, allowing light to fill the rooms that had long been shrouded in darkness. Outside, the night was still and clear. The fog that had enveloped the house now lifted. They stood on the front steps, gazing up at the old mansion. It looked the same as before, but they all knew it had changed in a profound way. Emily turned the key over in her hands, feeling its weight. "What do we do with this?" she asked. The guide shook his head. "We can't leave it here. It's too dangerous." Emily nodded, slipping the key into her pocket. "Then we'll take it far away from here, somewhere it can never be used again." As they walked away from the Sorrell-Weed House, the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, casting the mansion in a golden light. For the first time in decades, it seemed at peace. But as they disappeared down the street, a single window on the upper floor flickered, a shadow passing briefly across the glass. And deep within the walls, in the faintest whisper, the house seemed to murmur, "This is not the end." Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.